Hi, my name's Chris Carter, instructor here at Point Blank. If you want to learn more about sound design, head over to our website at pointblanklondon.com. In this video we're going to look at voicing, detuning and polyphony within Native Instruments Massive, and also introduce the concept of phase-locked oscillators. What I'm looking at the moment is a default massive patch, which means that I have square saw loaded into my 3 oscillators, and for this I'm going to adjust each one of those to be a sawtooth wave. This is very useful in this particular instance because the sawtooth is the most harmonically rich waveform containing all of the harmonics of the harmonic series. If I was to look at the output of a single oscillator on my frequency spectrum, and I'm just going to adjust the envelope shape to be a gate like this, then I can see that characteristic slope of a sawtooth wave, but I can also see that the sound is completely static. There's no kind of harmonic motion of any kind internally. If I introduce a second oscillator, and I'm going to do that just by increasing the amp level of oscillator 2, then I'm likely to start to see something slightly different. In fact, in this situation, I'm seeing something very different. As you can see, the harmonic pattern is completely changed. We have some harmonics which are more present and some which are less present. And if we look at the waveform, we can see that our sawtooth shape has now been disrupted because we have 2 sawtooth waves which are no longer directly on top of each other. And so what we're seeing and hearing is a principle of phase cancellation between 2 identical waveforms which are triggered at exactly the same frequency or pitch, but which are slightly out of sync with each other, or we could also describe this as being out of phase with each other. I can control the relative phase of these 2 waveforms by going to my oscillator tab and enabling this field here, restart via gate. And when I do that, you'll see that these markers become active. And bear in mind that only oscillator 1 and 2 are actually turned up at the moment. But what this means now is I can control the relative start point of those 2 oscillators. And if I just move oscillator 2 against oscillator 1, noting that we have across the top here an option to adjust the start point between 0 and 360 degrees, I'll see the pattern of harmonics change. And if you keep your eye on this field down here, you can see firstly we have 2 sawtooth waves which are directly locked in phase, and the harmonic pattern isn't changed at all. And as I adjust the start point of oscillator 2, you can see now they're very slightly out of sync, and you'll also see how now we have various different portions of the frequency spectrum which have been cancelled out. And wherever I adjust the start point of oscillator 2, we have a slightly different result. So this shows us straight away the principle of phase cancellation. If we have 2 identical signals at the same frequency which are slightly out of sync with each other, we're likely to see this principle of phase cancellation. And we can build on this by adjusting the frequency of our 2 oscillators. So we would do this by very slightly detuning 2 oscillators, and perhaps I could just adjust one of these to be a few cents up or a few cents down, cents being hundredths of a semitone. So we're only adjusting these by a very small amount. But what it does mean is that our 2 sawtooth waves are now running at slightly different speeds, and this means that they go in and out of sync with each other as the faster running oscillator kind of laps the slower running oscillator. And what we also see is harmonic movement in the sound. And this is a very simple principle which is the real fundamental of many different types of sounds that we can make. In particular, when people talk about sounds having a kind of analog quality, what they're often referring to is the fact that we have more than one signal. Between the two, we have some slight kind of difference and imperfection, and we start to get this movement and phase. And you can see at these lower frequencies more easily sounds going in and out of phase with each other and the harmonic movement that generates. And we could build on this principle even by using a single oscillator. So what I'm going to do is bring this one back down to 0, and I'm going to go to my voicing tab here, and this is where we control the polyphony of the instrument. By default, we have a polyphonic setting, which means I can play more than one note at a time. If I was to adjust this to monophonic, that means I can only play a single pitch. But whether I choose polyphonic or monophonic, you'll also notice that we have these two fields up here which are very important, and these control the number of voices which are active or available within the instrument. So at the moment, in this polyphonic mode, I have a maximum of 16 voices available. So that we could think of in this situation as 16 sawtooth waves. But I don't think I'm going to be playing 16 notes at the same time. So what I could do is adjust this second field to 4. And what that means now is each note is playing 4 sawtooth waves. And what I can also do is control the amount of detuning between those 4 voices on a single note. And I can do that via this pitch slider here. We'll also notice that the sound has just become significantly louder, and that's because instead of just triggering a single sawtooth, we're triggering 4. So I'm just going to bring my master level down quite a bit to compensate for that. And we don't really hear any difference at the moment, and that's because our voices are phase locked anyway, and it's just a single oscillator. But let's say we go back to our voicing tab and I introduce this pitch cutoff option. As I move my slider to the right, we have all kinds of harmonic movement going on inside the sound, and that's because we have very slightly detuned 4 voices on a single note. So it's similar to what we were doing with 2 oscillators. Bear in mind we're only using a single oscillator at the moment, but the principle is quite similar. But instead of using 2 sawtooth waves detuned here and here, we've taken a single oscillator, stacked up 4 sawtooth waves onto a single key, and we're using this slider now to control the amount of detuning. So what I can do is adjust the value between these 2 fields here and here to control the depth of detuning available on this slider. If, for instance, I move this slider all the way to the right now, this isn't going to sound particularly musical, because what I'm doing is detuning 4 voices through 1 semitone. So we end up with a really kind of detuned sound which doesn't have a very obvious pitch. So what I could do is adjust this value to be something closer to the kind of values that we were using before. So let's just say 10 cents. What that means now is I could use this slider to just control the amount of detuning of my 4 voices within a range which, let's say, 10 cents. This is something that we would typically use if we were looking for these kind of detuned analog sounds. What I could also do is go back to my oscillator tab and turn off restart via gate, and I think that will enhance the kind of, when I say analog, I use the term to refer to a kind of sound rather than an actual analog process. So you hear how the sound now loses its hard edge because our 4 sawtooth waves, which are all stacked on a single key, are no longer phase locked and starting from the beginning of their cycle. So we'll hear quite a significant difference if they're phase locked or not. So this is locked and this is not. So it's a more softer, fuzzy kind of sound without that hard edge on the front. So if I was looking for a more old school analog sound, what I could do is work with this idea of not phase locking oscillators, using multiple voices which are detuned. And I could enhance this effect further by, having done all of this, bringing in more than one oscillator. And again, let's just have a small amount of detuning. So I'm hearing multiple stacked detuned sawtooth waves now, which are giving me all kinds of movement in the sound. And whilst we're at it, we could bring in oscillator 3. We could leave this at 0 now, because you can see we've got plus 7 cents, minus 7 cents. If this one is at 0, then it averages the sound out nicely. Or alternatively, I could pitch this up an octave, so I could shift this up 12 semitones. And again, this is quite a nice old school analog type of sound. And if I wanted to increase the amount of detuning more, I could increase this value here on my voicing tab and use the slider to adjust the amount of detuning within the sound. So working with multiple oscillators, stacked, detuned, and working with the voicing in this way, we could now introduce the subtractive aspect of the instrument by working with low pass filters. And we could find a way to control this. Let's say I'm going to assign envelope 1, and if we were looking for some kind of swell or pad, then we would be and because the instrument is polyphonic, I can be playing multiple notes. Maybe a sound like this would benefit from some effects. So what I could do is perhaps introduce a little width into the sound, and maybe some reverb as well. And the reverb on massive I think is particularly good. And we could quite quickly change this into some kind of stab type sound just by adjusting the shape of our envelopes, both of the filter cutoff and of the amp. So let's just go to envelope 1, make the attack time short, bring the decay level all the way down. Perhaps we'll bring down the reverb time. And perhaps adjust how much the envelope actually opens the filter. So that's the principle of using multiple detuned oscillators or voices to achieve a kind of a old school or analog sound using massive.